Elaine stood on the yellow line that warns passengers they are too close to the edge of the platform and waited for the train. A breeze tugged at her raincoat, coaxing her to step back, but she stood her ground and stared at the tracks below. It would be quick this way, not like the time she used pills and Dennis yanked her back with the aid of emergency room doctors, where he left her under observation, telling them it wasn't the first time. The loudspeaker crackled to life and the announcer informed passengers of a troubled train 3 stations away, causing a delay. Grumbles of protest behind her caused Elaine to glance up from the empty tracks where she was surprised to find a large crowd gathered along the platform. Only one man, a few feet away, seemed unperturbed, patient, watchful. He was in his early 30s, a backpack towering above his head, a tourist, young enough to be her son if she'd ever had children. Elaine turned her attention back to the tracks. Dennis wasn't coming, and she didn't blame him. He had finally had enough of her, and after 25 years, he had finally left her for one of his young things, a woman without dead eyes that drained light from the world. "You need help," he'd said the night he left her in care of the medical system. "And I need to move on. I'm sorry. Sorry." No one was sorrier than she, that the color of her world was gone and she was unwanted. Even the muted daffodils in the psych ward courtyard had hung their heads as she passed, embarrassed at how she trudged through the world unworthy of notice. It was exhausting to exert herself over the weeks that followed her admittance to hospital. Drawing on all her reserves, she strived to look normal and act as if she were well. She took her medication, showed up for talk therapy, and bided her time until finally, that morning, she had been released, free again to determine her own fate. "Excuse me," a man's voice startled her from the present back to the present. She turned to find the young tourist standing behind her. She hoped he didn't want directions. She was terrible with directions. "You need to be careful," he said. "You could fall." Elaine's mind raced, trying to find something to say. "Mind your own business" seemed rude, and Elaine despised rudeness. "I was planning to jump, not fall, would probably bring the police and land her back in the psych ward." Flummoxed, she stared and nodded gently. "I drove trains a few years ago," he said. "In Toronto, we have drivers in the subway system, not like the automatic trains you have here." Elaine blinked, mind still racing, trying to grasp something to say to him, to leave her alone, to get on with things. "I couldn't stop him." His voice cracked and he paused, shook his head, choked down emotion that yearned to escape. "And I couldn't stop the train on time to save him." "Who?" she asked, wanting to know, but not wanting to know. "I never knew his name, but I will never forget how he looked straight at me, smiled, and then leaped right onto the tracks facing the train. And I'll never forget how his smile turned to horror when he realized I couldn't stop on time. He had waited too long, and now I relive his death every night, every single night." Elaine watched him, fascinated and unable to move as he placed his hand on her arm. She didn't flinch at the contact, though he was a large man, a stranger. "You know," he said, "I think all he wanted was to be seen by someone, to connect." Tilting her head up, Elaine considered the man's deep blue eyes, the color of Mediterranean oceans, the color of cloudless summer skies. "I see you," he said softly, and she knew he felt her pain. The years of loneliness and Dennis's betrayals dropped away and she began to sob. "Thank you," she whispered, and stepped back from the edge as the train came into view.